If you have made it to this tiny corner of YouTube, hi, welcome, I'm happy to have you here. My name is Andi, I'm a chaotic reader, and true to that sentiment, today I want to talk about 5 book series that I want to continue and 5 that I do not. Because ultimately I'm fine with treating some books as standalones even though they aren't. So get comfy, grab your drinks, grab your snacks, because we will talk about a lot of books today. First of all, what makes a good book series in my opinion? For me personally, the setting needs to be interesting and flexible enough to hold the plot of multiple books. Contemporary romance books are mostly standalones because the setting is rather straightforward. You have 2 people who will fall in love by the end of the book. There is not much more to it. On the other hand, fantasy stories can span multiple books because you can always bring in new elements along the way and stretch the adventures. Second, the character arcs need to develop at the right pace. I usually read fiction that is a mix of character and plot focused, and I enjoy it when the characters develop from point A to point B in one book and from point B to point C in the second book. If I feel like the characters are already at point C in the first book, I'm less inclined to pick up the next one because I'm thinking, what else can they do? Besides all of that, what else makes a good book series is just the vibes. If I'm having a great time with the story, I of course immediately want to pick up the next part as well. So let's start with the series that I do not want to continue. Why? Because the story gave me enough as a standalone, and I don't think the second or sometimes third book would add anything to that experience. Again, this is just my personal perception of these books. Feel free to convince me in the comments otherwise if you think I absolutely should pick up the next parts. I read the first part, A Magic Steeped in Poison, sometime last year, and I liked it. From what I can remember, we follow Ning, who enters a tea master competition to prove herself and save her sister's life. The magic system tied to tea and tea brewing in the story is truly unique, and it was super enjoyable to read about it, and the trials tied to it as well. Does it end in a cliffhanger? I don't even remember. Let me see. Yeah, kinda, but to be honest, I think I haven't really thought about the story besides the magic system ever since I put it down. I feel like A Magic Steeped in Poison works as a standalone. Based on the blurb, the second book takes the story in a slightly different direction, more focused on the kingdom and the political machinations, rather than Ning and her own character development. To be honest, in the first book, the romance subplot was a little bit weak, so there could be hope that it gets stronger in the second part, which is called A Venom, Dark and Sweet. I checked them both on Goodreads and on Storygraph. The second part was only reviewed by about 30% of the people who reviewed the first part, so there was a considerable drop-off between A Magic Steeped in Poison and the sequel. I really wanted to love this book and fall headfirst into the series, but it was just okay, and I don't feel like the other parts would add more to it. But maybe I'm wrong. I've heard people say that the second book is even better than the first. If anyone needs an introduction in the Kingdom of the Wicked, we are in the first point of view of Emilia, a witch whose family owns a Sicilian restaurant. That part I really liked. I'm starting to discover if a book has atmospheric food descriptions in it, it elevates the whole experience for me. The story kicks off with Emilia's twin sister, Victoria, being murdered and her meeting with Wrath, one of the princes of hell, who becomes her reluctant aide in the investigation. You get some kind of conclusion to this, if I remember correctly, but the plot thickens in the second book as Emilia's journey and investigation apparently takes her much deeper into the domain of the princes of hell. There's also a third book, The Kingdom of the Fear, that came out last year, if I remember correctly, but most of the praise seems to be concentrated on the second book that moves to new adult from young adult, that is the first book. Do I feel like I'm missing out on a lot after I stopped the series after the first book? Not really. The dynamic between Emilia and Wrath had so much potential in my opinion, but it did not really live up to that potential in Kingdom of the Wicked, and I didn't have much hope that it would get better in the next parts. Interestingly though, more than half of the users who reviewed the first part also reviewed the second, so there's already a better rate than, for example, A Magic Steeped in Poison. Next on the list is one of the first Asian mythology inspired stories, which I also read last year, bought the sequel for it and then kind of forgot about it. In this one, the plot setup is slightly similar to A Magic Steeped in Poison, as here we have Maya Tamarin, a young seamstress who poses as a boy to enter the competition to become the imperial tailor. Not gonna lie, some of the plot points blur together for me, even though I read them a couple months apart. Here as well, of course, there are bigger powers at play in the royal court, but in this case the love interest, for example, is the court enchanter Eden, who sees through Maya's own disguise, but hides his own secrets, of course. Similarly, the romance subplot did not really make my heart flutter. I honestly can recall the tailoring magic scenes better than the relationship building ones, and that's not usual for me when I read Romantasy. As mentioned, I already own the second book, so maybe I will pick it up one day, but as of now I'm quite content with the experience I got from Spin the Dawn, and I don't feel like the sequel would add anything extra. To mention statistics, around 40% of the readers who reviewed the first part also wrote a review for the second part on Goodreads, so it seems like I'm not the only one who treats this book more as a standalone. Talking about standalones, I was surprised to learn that The Violet Made of Thorns will be part of a series, but the second part's title hasn't even been revealed yet, or at least I couldn't find it anywhere online. I feel like this book made some waves for a hot second on TikTok, but now no one talks about it anymore, and I completely understand it. I will probably unhaul my copy at one point, because reading it once was fine, but truth to be told, I haven't thought about it ever since. In this story, we have the combination of a morally grey witch, Violet, a cursed prince called Cyrus, and the prophecy that should set up the readers for a good time, but it kind of fell short. The supposedly love-hate relationship felt more like hate and rather inconsistent, and the morally grey main character was more just mean and self-serving, with inner monologues about being like a tough woman, but showing none of that in action. The backdrop is the royal court with supposed intrigue and court politics, but to be honest, I cannot recall any of that. Which makes it unlikely for me to pick up the second book. The character development also kind of went nowhere in my opinion, and the world building wasn't interesting enough for me to stick around. I was hesitant to include this one on the list, because it's not 100% set in stone that I won't pick up the sequel, but so far I haven't really felt inclined to jump into it after reading the first part. I'm talking about The Daughter of the Moon Goddess, which is another Chinese mythology inspired fantasy with the Daughter of the Moon Goddess as our main character, who embarks on an adventure in the Celestial Kingdom to free her mother from her exile on the moon, and slowly begins to uncover her own past, or her own origins as well. As someone who watches Chinese historical dramas, this book felt like that, with all the good parts and the bad parts as well. Good parts include being richly atmospheric with a celestial backdrop, consistent in the character development, like there's an entire period that she spends training before becoming a skilled warrior, which helps it make sense, and there's also some delicious slow burn romance along the way. On the other hand, the story is kind of divided into arcs, and that made it drag a little bit for me. Sometimes it made me even forget what her original plan was, like to save her mother. Also, there's a love triangle, which, to be honest, as far as love triangles go, is well executed, but it's just not my cup of tea. So all of it made me hesitant to pick up the sequel, which is the last part of the duology, and also because the sequel is like almost 500 pages. I was also surprised to find that on Goodreads, only around 26% of the readers rated the second part, compared to all the ratings that the first one has gotten, but the second part, Heart of the Sun Warrior, was only published last year November, so it's still relatively fresh. I invite you to convince me in the comments that the Heart of the Sun Warrior is worth reading, because I really wanted to love this series. Now onto the book series that I'm definitely continuing. You knew that I was going to mention the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, because I cannot stop talking about it. You will get my detailed opinion in my next video about my April and May reads, but let's just say it was the very rare case that I enjoyed the second book even more than the first one, and I already gave the first one 5 stars. So stay tuned for me babbling about it even more later. I cannot wait for the third one to come out in October, keeping my fingers crossed that this edition will be available here in Austria, because I refuse to get a cover that doesn't match the first and the second part already. The Sands of Arawiya is also a series that I mentioned before, and I also mentioned how much I enjoyed it. I remember reading it on the underground when I was traveling to work in the morning, and I almost missed my stop because I was so focused on the story. We Hunt the Flame has a well-executed enemies to lovers romance, where the characters are actually complex, badass but also vulnerable, which is always a valuable combination in storytelling in my opinion. In the focus of the book is Saphira, nicknamed the Hunter, because she braves the cursed forest to supply her village with food. She is tied to her obligations, much similarly to Nasir, nicknamed the Prince of Death, who is the Sultan's son, who is pretty much a pawn in his hands and an assassin who does his bidding. The Sultan sends Nasir after Saphira to uncover a magical artifact and try to stop the cursed forest from expanding. They are not alone in this journey, and the cast of side characters provides a good balance as well as comedic relief during the story. The second book, Free the Stars, sees them continuing what the end of the previous book already set in motion, both Saphira and Nasir fighting internal battles as well, and apparently the Roman subplot also receives more weight, which would be a reason alone for me to pick it up. Described in the blurb as lush and striking, hopeful and devastating, I'm sure I will love the sequel just as much as the first book. The next book, I can imagine, is also on a lot of people's list of sequels they enjoyed, since the second part has a higher rating on Goodreads currently than the first one, is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I'm pretty sure I will pick up Hellbent in an ebook form because that cover creeps me out, but Leigh Bardugo did it again and crafted a mysterious and dark world that the readers are excited to revisit, myself included. In Ninth House we have Alex Stern, who is trying to navigate Yale and not only her classes, but also the secret societies that operate with an organization called Leigh, keeping watch over their activities and basically ensuring that everything goes smoothly. Of course, nothing goes smoothly, and Alex finds herself in the thick of all things paranormal. In the sequel Hellbent, which officially came out in January this year, apparently we are going straight to the underworld, and also there is more focus on Darlington, Alex's mentor, based on the blurb, and we are also getting an assembly of side characters, much more heavier in the sequel, and I do love that because I already enjoyed the side characters in Ninth House. I don't think I will dive into the world before autumn though, but it does sound like an ideal read for those darker and chillier months. Do I have a sugar high from the bubble tea? Maybe. Oh well. I'm cheating a little bit with the end of this list because I'm also including series that I haven't started yet but very much want to. One of them that I have my eyes on is Belladonna by Evelyn Grace, which leans more into the gothic, paranormal and thriller genres while still being a YA fantasy romance. Allegedly, the love interest is Death himself, and the main character Signa enlists his help to uncover a murder after a ghost appeared to her with the claim that she, as in the ghost, was poisoned. You know I love a good setting, and this one promises to be dark, gothic and irresistible. The second part, titled Foxglove, is set to be published in August this year, but people on social media are already going crazy over the sneak peeks. The last series I haven't read yet, but very much want to, is Foul Lady Fortune by Chloe Gong. It is set in 1930s Shanghai, and it is a murder mystery story. Do I need to say more? We have our protagonist Rosalind Lang, who is a spy with a pinch of supernatural abilities, and she's tasked with solving some murders by posing as a married couple with another spy, Orion Hong. So we have spies as our main characters, Shanghai in the 1930s as the backdrop, and a fake marriage trope, which just sounds like the perfect recipe for a really enjoyable book for me. This apparently will be a duology, but already contains a short novel between the first book and the second book from what I've seen online. So these were the 5 book series I don't want to continue and 5 that I do or I want to get into. Did I include your favorite series? Let me know in the comments below. Also, if you have any tips on how to consistently read series, because I'm so bad at it as you can tell. Hope you enjoyed spending time with me and see you in my next video. Bye!